going to set the stage for everyone on this podcast. The year is 2009-ish. Podcasting has become a sensation, and rising to the top of the podcasting world is the paleo community. Within that paleo community are two brilliant minds, Steph Greunke and Liz Wolfe, and we have them both here today. Hello, paleo and podcasting OGs, Steph and Liz. Thank you for coming on today.
Are you going to have like a little applause track? Hey!
Michelle, you had me laughing like 2 seconds into the podcast, so this is going to be an interesting one.
I'm nervous. I'm literally nervous. Wait, the three of us have been talking in our group chat, which I formerly titled all of our heights and weights because we're all kind of the same height and weight, which I thought was very chill and fun. We were talking about how our biggest fear of this podcast was that it would be a 6-hour podcast, and we all have lives and businesses, and you two have children to get back to. So we're going to do our best to laugh a lot and to share a lot, but within, only like a 4 or 5 hour time frame.
Right. Absolutely.
I want you to intro yourself so that my listeners, who I'm sure already know both of you, can get reacquainted, or if they're new to you, get to know you. So Liz or Steph, one of you hit us with your intro, tell it, and then we'll kind of roll from there.
Okay. Well, I'm Liz Wolfe. I'm still getting used to these headphones because even though I've been podcasting for 10 years, I have not actually adapted to all of the cool equipment that's out there, like headphones. That's new. I have been doing the online talking about food things since probably 2011. And in that time, I've done a lot of programs, and I published a book, or my book was published in 2014. It's called Eat the Yolks. And 10 years later, it's still shocking to me that I'm hearing people talk about egg white omelets and that they're still on the menu anywhere. I get it. It's protein, but it's floppy and it's watery and it's disgusting. So just double X's in both columns for flavor and nutrition. And now I'm sort of more in the mom world, doing a lot of encouraging moms to get moving in a way that resonates most with them, providing resources as much as possible, and hopefully sort of simplifying the dietary stuff to the degree that I can to those with whom my message resonates. There you go.
I think you do a masterful job at that, and I think you're extremely funny along the way. And I already have to comment that you're extremely funny and have amazing hair. We always talk about this every podcast we do together. And Liz, also, I think it's so funny because you wrote Eat the Yolks in 2014.
Yep.
And I just did a podcast last season about the cholesterol debate because we're not through it yet. We're not out of the woods yet. People still believe wholeheartedly, within the medical system, practitioners themselves, that consumption of cholesterol causes heart disease. So the fact that I think this conversation is going to be very relevant, the conversations you were having in 2011 are still the same conversations in different forms we're having today, which is frustrating in some ways. And then in some ways, I think we've gone farther in a good way.
Sure.
So thank you, Liz. Thanks for the book too. Steph?
Yeah, Liz, you forgot to say that you were really humble too. That's one thing you did mention.
I'm really funny. I'm very accomplished, and I'm very humble.
But I mean it.
You actually are, though.
You're more amazing than you give yourself credit for.
I love both of you.
I don't know, who am I? I guess, I graduated as an RD in 2009. Are we going to get, really philosophical? And I remember graduating, and one of the first things that I encountered as a dietitian was my husband coming home from a CrossFit class saying, hey, I'm thinking about doing this paleo diet. What do you think? And at the time, I was a vegetarian, and that's what I was kind of indoctrinated into in my training as a dietitian. And I immediately told him no because of that cholesterol stuff. Oh my gosh, all those egg yolks, all that saturated fat. And reading The Paleo Diet by Robb Wolf was my first, I guess, conflict, or just pushed me against what my beliefs were in a way where it was a different style of teaching that made sense, and all the pathways made sense, and what he was talking about, while it was conflicting, it was something that I wanted to dive into. And I would say that that was really the start of my functional medicine and holistic career, of being able to take conflicting advice and giving it the time of day that it deserves to really understand how I feel and what's out there. And so So I've been working with women for a really long time in different capacities, whether it's supporting them through elimination diets. I worked with the Whole30 for about 6 years and did programming with the founder and worked with them full time and with their Whole Mamas pregnancy program. So women's health, PCOS, elimination diets, then moved on to prenatal and postpartum nutrition because those areas of health are really underserved, and the quality and quantity of information that's given of what you can do proactively to take care of yourself is just not there. So that's what I'm doing today, is working on prenatal, postnatal nutrition for women that does not necessarily always equal a paleo diet.
And I love, Steph, your approach, just you as a person, but I love your approach to working with clients. It's so compassionate, and you have these beautiful long-term clients who you've worked with too. And I know you kind of, like you said, you see the science for what it is, and you're also open to applying curiosity and looking deeper. And Liz, you're the same way. When something feels, I don't know, revolutionary or wrong, you're like, well, let me learn why this is interesting in the first place and what the merit is. I think the paleo diet for all three of us was I was like gobsmacked when I first started reading, like, Chris Kresser's books, Rob Wolf's, like you said. I was on like Rob Wolf's blog, and I was like, whoa, this is so cool. And it was for me, the paleo diet was for me the first time that I was like, oh, this is so different and feels so much more right to me than what I had learned. And that at the time, the paleo diet, 2009, 2011, like we're talking about, was really popularized, like you said, in CrossFit gyms and with these practitioners or researchers. But it definitely was not popularized in the nutrition and dietetics community. It was definitely very counter, definitely very not chill to be saying that. And it wasn't so much then like a diet culture issue. It was a snake oil issue. It was like, this is not scientifically based and all of that stuff. Can either of you kind of speak into that a little bit and what your experiences was? Liz as an NTP and Steph as an RD, we had this kind of idea, oh my God, inside of us, paleo was like, ooh, there's some promising, interesting stuff about this. This is a new way of looking at things. But then what kind of was the response from your nutrition communities at the time in the beginning?
Yeah. What I ended up doing was, this is the whole reason I wrote my book in the first place, was that there was this push-pull where there were things that I was saying, they were making sense to people. And, we can get into the nitty-gritty of how, like, at the beginning, paleo was very low carb, and it was, all of these different manifestations and iterations of it that have sort of popped up through the years as people experiment and, look back and look at the mistakes that might have been made. But when I was first talking about paleo, it was fully like sprung from my involvement with CrossFit. I was a level 1 coach for a very short period of time. I was certified level 1 coach for a very short period of time.
Wow.
Going through the Nutritional Therapy Association's program and becoming an NTP, all the things I was talking about would be met with that type of resistance. Like, but what about the cholesterol? Well, isn't animal protein, doesn't it cause cancer? Aren't carbs, don't I need fiber from bread? And isn't that really important? And so I actually wrote this book and divided it up into sections. The chapters are literally like, we have the protein chapter, we have the carb chapter, we have the fat chapter, we have the nutrients chapter, and every single one of them was just like everything that I was saying to people on a regular basis. Like, this is what you've been told about cholesterol. This is what the evidence actually says, or at the very least, this is the evidence that exists to contradict what you've been hearing. And it's valid. And so presenting that, talking about how important cholesterol is in the body for hormone health, all of that. Then going through a lot of what I learned from some of these other really intrepid thinkers and scientists in the paleo community who were breaking down things like the China study, which, by the way, the China study, a book by T. Colin Campbell, it's not a study. It's a book about a study that was done.
It's a book.
It's a little bit, it's complex, but people like Denise Minger, who I don't even know what her status is these days, but she was just she was like a watchdog. Like, she was somebody who was really intelligent, with enough spare time to go in and break down a lot of the things that people were saying about the China study, about animal protein causing cancer, and then going into fat, saturated fat, trans fat, all of these distinctions that we hadn't made and just throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So it really was just meeting people where they were and saying, I know you know this. This is what I knew in quotes as well. And this is what there's actually evidence to fully contradict that also dovetails with like our instinct and our evolution and our common sense. So I'm not saying paleo as presented by any one person or organization is right, or I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm saying the ideas within are compelling enough that I think they deserved another look. And then, at this point, I think they've kind of been folded into the overall like cultural, I don't know if you'd say zeitgeist, nutrition zeitgeist, but this idea that whole foods from nature are pretty much as close to optimal as you can get. And then it's just kind of how you implement that, how much of one thing and how much of another.
And I'm going to agree with you times a million on the fact that for paleo, for me, and why it appealed, I think, to all of us was for the first time from a nutrition community standpoint that I was looking at something and I was looking at it not from the same framework. So it's not so much what the paleo diet is and ways of the foods or anything like that. For me, it was, if I was learning about IBS in my undergrad, I was learning about not even a low FODMAP diet at the time probably, but I was learning about here are some foods that could make IBS irritated. That's kind of what it was at the time. Don't piss off your reflux. Don't eat spicy or acidic foods that are going to make your reflux worse. And paleo was the first time for me that I was like, oh, the whole goal is different. The goal is you're reversing disease using food. And that for me was hugely revelatory, especially on my own anxiety journey, because I was like, wait, these foods that I can eat can actually help me with my anxiety. I couldn't, it was like unfathomable to me essentially. And that's what I think was so charged with the RD community at the time and why it was so dismissed in the RD community. And I know Steph, you'll talk into this too, but it wasn't even like a thing. It was like, it's some gym bros at CrossFit talking about, all this stuff. But I think for me, it was that initial shift into what I consider functional nutrition or functional medicine, and the kind of at its root, this idea that we're not just trying to manage illness, but that we're actually trying to reverse it, and that food has a role in that. That for me, paleo was huge in just opening that door. And again, we're not saying it's perfect, and we will also talk at some point about what a paleo diet even is. If it's new to some people, it's been around, like we said, 15 years, but actually longer. But we will talk about that too. So Steph, tell me, you got fascinated with the paleo diet too, and you got fascinated with kind of functional nutrition. What was that like, having come again from this vegetarian kind of mindset? Were you getting pushback from RD peers? What was your experience like?
Yeah. So I remember actually there's an annual conference every year for dietitians. And it's a very interesting conference. There's a humongous expo that is largely sponsored by Coca-Cola and Nestle and all of these different brands. And within that expo, there was a booth that was set up for Victory Belt Publishing, which was the book that Rob Wolfe's book and a couple of others down the line were published by. And Rob had asked me to come and stand at the booth and talk about the paleo diet to dietitians. So you're giving me all these flashbacks of things that have happened that I just remember now. And I remember standing at the booth and having all these dietitians walk by. And what was so interesting to me was that it seemed like the dietitians that have been in the game for a while were the ones that were quick to dismiss and kind of roll their eyes at me at the booth and maybe come up and see what was going on or tell me their concerns and complaints. And it was that, like, where are you going to get your fiber? And whole grains are really important. And aren't you afraid of the saturated fat? And the things that we are constantly hearing that have value, but you have to take that next step to understand, like, okay, well, what does that actually mean? And is saturated fat a concern for everybody? And all of those things that we know in functional medicine. So, but the younger RDs that were maybe RDs to be, or they had just gotten their degree, they were the ones that were interested. They were the ones that were maybe questioning things themselves about the food guide, the food plate, the my plate, whatever whatever you want to call it, or you understand it by. So there was definitely a mix. And I think it was interesting to be able to talk to the people and spend my energy on the people that were open to it. And I hate confrontation. So my approach has always been, I will speak my truth to the people that will listen, and I will not expend my energy on the people that are intentionally wanting to misunderstand. Because you're just going to spin your circles and spin in circles with people who have already made up their mind that it's a terrible approach. So that's kind of how my experience.
Yeah, when I graduated school, I was in what I would call like hardcore conventional nutrition, working for private practices that were very within kind of the model of what I would call the consensus of nutrition, which was like weight loss, calories, that kind of game. And what I would also say is the paleo diet was extremely challenging to all of the scientific truths that we learned in school. So I think it was really hard for dietitians in an honest way to be like, what was everything I just learned like totally not it? Like, did I actually, it really challenged the core of conventional nutrition in a lot of ways, which was like earth shattering for me. So there was like a grieving for me too, because I was like, oh, I was so proud of this dietitian degree. I'm not proud of my dietitian degree. I think the basis of science is still really great. But it challenged the ego part of my degree, which is, there's a lot of ego in the nutrition community on all sides, certainly in the paleo community too, and all of this. But it challenged us to look at our own attachment to our identity through our degrees. Also, I think it was like very harrowing. I was like, oh, whoa, this is totally not what I've been looking at or learning. And I think, again, a paleo diet's so silly because we're talking about like a style of eating having such a grand impact, but it certainly did. And I think it was kind of what led a lot of people into the field of functional nutrition and the passion for it. So I'm going to walk 15 steps back. When we say a paleo diet, what we're talking about is this specific style of eating, which includes consuming foods in their most whole form and excludes foods like corn, soy, legumes, grains, and dairy. Can you, either of you, just on the most basic level, speak to why this diet was developed and why these specific foods are not included? Liz, you want to jump in?
Sure. And I wanted to make a quick comment on ego as well. At one point, I felt like, you and I have talked about this. At one point, I felt like I had to get my RD to be able to move forward and be helpful to people. I'm so grateful that I found the Nutritional Therapy Association. But what I decided to do instead was to go get my MPH, my Master's in Public Health. And I'm telling you, I got one course in to my MPH, and I recognized that same level of ego around how what we know scientifically, or what we think we know scientifically, is applied on the public health sphere. And it's just wild to think how all we want to do is help people, right? And how many layers of special interests and scientific sort of illiteracy and ego can be sort of layered on top of good people who just want to be helpful. It was pretty crazy. So I dropped that pretty darn quick. So I am still wildly uncredentialed.
No, you're not.
You're not wildly uncredentialed. And I'm not the type of dietitian who, and I'll say this, Steph, and you can agree or disagree, but in school, it was a lot of like, dietitians are the only nutrition experts. Yeah. And the reason that I think we do that is because we want to gain licensure and get higher salaries for dietitians. My approach, and this is just, the first time I'm really even talking about it on the podcast, I was working in nursing homes, and part of my work in nursing homes was to give, if someone had lost X amount of weight in the time that they were in the nursing home, it's obviously a risk factor if you're elderly and fragile in any way to lose weight rapidly. It could be a sign of a bigger issue. So you have to put an intervention in place when that happens. It's absolutely required. And the intervention for dietitians is generally you have to give Ensure. And I was like, well, can we kind of make smoothies? And some nursing homes are more open to this than others. Not really the ones I was working in. It was always a cost thing. I was like, but these are actually expensive. And it was very hard for me to understand kind of the system that was in place. And I am by nature, unlike you, Steph, I'm very rebellious and I'm very willing to go against the grain, but only when it's for a good reason and not in harming anyone. And for me, there was I was getting sick over the work that I was doing. And I realized, and this is the honest truth, I was like, I can't work within this system. So I'm going to have to just leave and create my own business altogether because I can't be bound by all of what you're talking about, Liz. I can't be bound by other people's egos, bad science that's been perpetuated by lobbying and food companies and food marketers. I was like, I'm just not, there are people like Marion Nestle, like God bless her, because she does day in and day out, does everything to fight the system-wide issues. But for me, and in most transparency, I wanted to help the individual. And maybe that makes me a worse person or something, but I was like, I need to leave so I can do the actual one-on-one work, because I realized how ingrained all these systems were, and in my own head too. Like I'm telling you, it's so silly that something like paleo could have taken me there, but it really did. I was like, whoa, like this is so challenging who I am as a person and what I believed before. And it was just like, don't eat grains. Like that little thing could have such an impact. Okay. So anyone take us back really quick. Give us a little paleo rundown too.
Well, I remember.
Steph, you want to jump in?
Yeah, Steph, you go ahead. I was thinking about Lauren Cordain, like Art Devaney, like
that's what I'm
way
thinking
back
of too.
there. Yeah, all this. And even like George and Mary Eads.
30 years ago.
I think it's like 80s.
Yeah.
So they've been talking about it for a long time. But yeah, Steph, you go.
Yeah, I think when a lot of people think about paleo, what I heard, at least from dietitians, was this understanding that paleo is just eating what ancestrally was appropriate or what caveman used to eat and these type of things. But what we're looking at is a framework that you mentioned it, Michelle, is focused on whole unprocessed foods. And so it's not about eating a specific way that our ancestors ate or based on maybe like Paleolithic principles necessarily. It's about getting back to the roots of what is the most nutrient dense food available. And when we think about a paleo diet, what are the most nutrient dense food? It's going to be your meats. It's going to be your seafood. It's going to be your fruits and vegetables. It's going to be the addition of whole fats like avocados, olives, nuts, and seeds, not ones that are processed with a bunch of honey roasted or sugar. Sweeteners that are more from maple syrup and honey versus maybe stevia, Splendid type things that are more highly processed. And so I know there's a lot more history, and maybe Liz, you can get into that of like where it stemmed from. I know Lauren Cordain had like he had a book actually before Rob Wolfe that went into his understanding of the literature. But for me, what paleo is looking back at, what did we do before we had the invention of the industrial food processing, where we were able to make foods quickly, cheaply, using R&D like research that basically makes food hyper palatable so we can't resist it. And thinking about the example of a potato is one that I hear a lot. It's like, how many baked whole potatoes would you eat versus chips?
100.
Although paleo is like, potatoes are controversial in the paleo world too. Like at one point,
oh God, yeah.
I know.
But like that as an example,
white
potatoes are gonna,
especially
sweet potatoes are fine.
So
sweet potatoes, okay. White potatoes,
sweet potatoes,
we got a problem.
Well, this is so. I'm so glad we actually brought up potato stuff in your amazing definition too of the paleo diet, because again, we're thinking of the paleo diet on a concept level versus an execution level. So on a concept level, it's like this idea we're eating like our ancestors. Our bodies haven't evolved so much since then. Like our internal workings are the same. So if our environment changes a lot, it's going to create illness. And I feel like that's pretty solid. The funny part, and what is a response that I've often heard from conventional practitioners, is cavemen had a small lifespan. Yeah. So it's like, why would you want to eat like that?
The amount of times I've heard that.
We can't look at, exactly.
And that's almost the easiest one to break down. Like sure. Yeah, and you can oppose that pretty quickly.
And it's also the idea of eating in a paleo way is not to say that you dismiss all of conventional modern medicine, which there's hugely positive applications for. Like there's many, many aspects of modern medicine that are absolutely incredible, especially for acute illness. We're really talking about the paleo diet in the context of chronic illness, which cavemen did not have. That was or very, very, very low rates and just a genetic level. So it's a very funny response. Again, this other interesting part of it is within the paleo kind of community, there's also been a lot of heavy debates, right? Because people understand things like butter are awesome, but it's like dairy, and dairy is no good. People understand potatoes are awesome, but like potatoes weren't cultivated during this specific region at this specific time. So I think where all of us have kind of landed is like eat real foods, light paleo, not this kind of fragmented, super Bibleistic, super word for word from like the word of the paleo gods kind of version of it. Can either of you jump in on that too?
Well, first, I love the word Bibleistic. That's my new the Bibleistic. It's Bibleistic. I don't know. It might be. We might.
Offensive. I just mean like people taking the literal word of the books as opposed to applying with
Yes,
you know,
the spirit versus
their
the
own
letter.
interpretation.
Yeah. The spirit,
Totally.
the spirit
Exactly.
versus the letter.
Yeah, let's go with that instead.
I like it.
Bible
I
mistake.
remember, people, they layered things together. And it was interesting at the beginning of paleo. And Steph, I want to hear if you remember this, when it really grew out of CrossFit. But the CrossFit people were also at the time very interested. I don't want to say preoccupied, but they're very interested in leanness. Like people were always talking about leaning out. Like that was the term, leaning out. I really want to lean out.
Leaning.
Yeah, leaning out. The new word for toning. Like exact same thing, different term. We cover our multitude of sins by just changing the vocabulary. So it just naturally got folded together where we've talked about this, Michelle, around other things, that you want something to be true, so you kind of retrofit it to what sounds reasonable. And that's paleo. Paleo sounds very reasonable, but then you're using paleo as this tool to lean out and to increase performance and to do all of these different things. And it ended up that paleo got sort of wrapped up in the low carb performance type community. And, people, it was an experiment. Like you're experimenting with that because there's a million different arguments for how many carbs you should eat, when and why, and who you are and all of that. But we were kind of painting over the whole of people's experiences with, if you have a problem, just eliminate gluten, go paleo, and cut your carbs down. And I say this all the time. Somebody was on my Facebook page like 10 years ago going, I shared some kind of tomato sauce or something on my Facebook page, and they're like, tomatoes are way too full of carbs. Way too full of carbs. Like you shouldn't be eating tomatoes. And I was like, oh my God, we've lost the plot.
Because there's no standard.
Right. Which is
we've lost the whole thing.
We've just I was like, I don't know how to talk to you. And that's where I think we have to be willing to tease apart all these little elements of what's informing our point of view. So we've got this paleo framework, which is a great idea. It evolved sort of from the 80s and 90s into the early 2000s. I think we were talking about canola oil being beneficial because of its omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. And then we start learning more about, how canola oil is super highly processed. And rather than trying to replicate something that we decide from whatever era of human history is most pertinent to our bodies today. We talked about this as well in the past, Michelle, where what epoch are we talking about? Are we talking about when fruits were abundant and there were a lot of carbs available? Are we talking about like the selective pressures that led our genetics to evolve in certain ways in different parts of the world? We can get into the nitty-gritty of that, but first, we've got to tease apart, like, am I really looking at this through a lens of, being pragmatic and really looking at the evidence for what it is and teasing apart whether I'm adding this layer of, say, low carb, it should be low carb because I want to be lean or because it actually makes sense for my body.
Totally. And I think you're touching on this community aspect of it too, which is to become like, it's almost, let's use paleo as like a noun or something. Like, to become paleo, you almost had to follow the rules and ignore individual choice, which we see amongst any diet. And I think paleo was really specific. And I want Steph, you to speak into this too, because it had a community aspect that was of mostly healthy people, but it was being marketed to mostly sick people. So it was a very interesting dichotomy, and certainly I believe that kind of many types of people, I would say every single person benefits from eating whole unprocessed foods. But let's talk about what the community felt like then, Steph, and the kind of inclusivity of the community then, and that weird pitch that it was like CrossFit bros pitching to sick people, and it was like the science kind of messaging miss. Talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, what's coming to mind right now, I don't know if this is what you're hitting on, but I think this is an important point, is that every year there would be a paleo conference that was held, and the who's who in the paleo community would speak, and people that were following the plan and really excited about it would attend. And you would look around the room, and there certainly was a type. I'm sure you were there, Liz. Like, there's like a type that's there. It's somebody that is fit, somebody that is healthy, somebody that is relatively lean, somebody that is following multiple different wellness hacks, whether that's including intermittent fasting and doing a certain workout. And I remember hearing from people that were really excited to go to this conference that didn't, because they felt like they were maybe too out of shape, or maybe too overweight, or maybe
it's horrible.
not paleo enough to be there. And I remember hearing that, and it broke my heart. And I actually heard from people that were like just breaking down while they were there. They're like, I am so excited about this movement, and I don't feel included in it because everybody around me is a certain type and has a certain outfit.
And people were being judgmental, by the way. Like people were, I mean, they were talking online like, so-and-so looks this way. Like, why are we even listening to them? It was really toxic.
Yeah.
I interrupted.
Wow,
Sorry,
that's
Steph.
It's okay.
no, it's important.
Yeah. So I think...
No, I want to hear.
So I think that, I mean, that's definitely part of it is it is easy when something is working for you to get excited about it and to shout it from the rooftops and maybe miss a step in being thoughtful about how you're explaining how you're doing it. Or for in the case of paleo, I feel like it was really important, Liz and I being part of the movement early on is because a lot of the messaging was for men. It wasn't for like necessarily women's health. So when we're talking about the carb situation, I mean, I had lost my period for a really long time because I wasn't paying attention to the amount of carbs that I was eating for the workout I was doing, right? Doing CrossFit, but having a little bit of a sweet potato is not going to be the best for reproductive hormones. But the guys seem to get away with it okay, right? Or just paleoing harder and maybe putting in more intermittent fasts because that's healthy may not be beneficial for a woman. I wrote a blog post for the Rob Wolfe's Paleo Solution blog about keto and concerns about keto for women because I had experienced it myself where I lost my cycle. I was experiencing signs of the female athlete triad. And I had, at that time, after women had been doing it for a while, that was the concern that was coming to me, right? In the beginning, in any kind of diet, if you change to eat more whole foods and healthier and you're thoughtful and you're drinking more water, doing all the things, you're going to feel great. But then after a couple of months, it really starts showing if it's working for you or not. And I had been seeing that over and over again, that women would lose their cycle or they would just start crashing and burning at their workouts, or they started experiencing mood changes because they weren't getting enough nutrition, low energy, thyroid issues. And so within any diet framework, it's really important to understand what your context is and apply it specifically for your life stage.
Yeah. And I think at the time, again, people were they weren't meaning to be judgmental. They were so freaking excited about this information. They were like, and yeah, there are definitely people who are being judgmental. I am validating your experience, both of you. It's not even a question. I am certain about that because of the community aspect, but it was so wild for people, and they all felt like us three did. We were like, oh my God, this is it. This feels like it. And it was exciting. And it was so, especially in the realm of chronic illness, where before in ways of diet interventions, sure, there was a ketogenic diet specific for seizures. We kind of were like playing with the Mediterranean diet a little bit. Of course, vegan and vegetarian had been the reigning winners for a very long time, but it gave and inspired, I think, a lot of hope in people that they hadn't had before, that like food could actually, scientifically reverse or change the course of disease. But what happened with it sounds like from what you're both saying, is it kind of got into, maybe that excitement got into some hands that weren't as cautious from a practitioner standpoint as they were from a research standpoint, because researchers look at things very differently than a practitioner does. So you can give these kind of broad recommendations and say, look at this study with MS. It reversed MS. Can you freaking believe this? It's so exciting. I get it. But the critical application is so much more important, and the clinical application than the diet itself. So the premise was there, but the excitement was higher than the promise, I think, in the beginning, because we weren't really sure how it was going to impact people of different kind of varying illnesses. Liz, do you want to speak into that a little bit too?
Well, yeah, it was like...
See your eyes open.
I have so much to say. I need to be like jotting all of this down. This is so good because it's like Steph said, it's bringing back so many memories, but it's like, we thought paleo fixes everything all the time. It fixes, we had Terry Walls on our podcast. We had so many individuals on the podcast with anecdotal experiences, and anecdotes are useful. That's how we construct hypotheses. That's how we like push something forward into actually becoming, peer-reviewed science. But what was happening is rather than saying paleo, not even paleo, real food, nutrient-dense food from nature is an excellent tool for the right people at the right time. It's one of the tools in the toolbox that we should probably be implementing in a very considered, thoughtful way. We were saying paleo does this and it does this and it does this and it is the way and it's the only way. And even if we would have said intellectually, no, I don't think that. No, I'm not painting with that kind of a broad brush. I think and I think myself included, we're really approaching it that way. Like, look at everything it can do. Is there anything it can't do? And if it's not working for you, then you're doing something wrong. And not like
you're the problem.
You're the problem. And it amounts to that. It amounts to like paleo harder and you're the problem. But what we were saying felt very innocent. We were saying things like, well, are you still having cream in your coffee?
Yeah.
So you need to get that cream out of the coffee. Like, that's the problem. You know?
That potato
so that's the way I see it. Yeah, it's that potato. It's, you're eating.
It's the white potato. It's not paleo. Yeah. We used a really good premise as a more than just a framework. It was a prescription. And I think that was the issue. And it was, I have to say it was so out of excitement and so out of hope. Again, Steph, even when we were in school to be a dietitian, I didn't get I got jazzed about the numbers, but what I never saw in schooling was how, besides helping people to lose weight, what tool am I going to have to literally be able to help someone? And I felt ooh, I got something now. And it really felt like that. And again, I think it was overzealous, but I have to say, even to this day, some of the framework, it's still there. I have to just laugh at us for a second, because the fact that we have to have a podcast after 15 years saying that eating real whole foods is probably more healthful than eating processed foods we're living in a twilight zone. It's a crazy conversation that we're having. It's just, I had to laugh at us and be so meta about this, because it's wow, we are having the same conversation today that you guys were having for the past 14, 15 years. It's the same conversation. And I'm still as excited about the applications of food in ways of reversal of illness. What I'm more critical of now is obviously the environment of which people's bodies receiving that food, and obviously making it more individualized. But that original hope and promise, I still think we can, after 15 years, I still think there's something there that we all kind of implement in the work that we do and the thoughts that we have. But what we're talking about also is when it got kind of hijacked and egoed and moved in the wrong directions. And when I think all of us were overzealous in that hope too. Steph,
yeah, I was just going to say, it's funny you mentioned that, because I remember reading the Paleo Solution book, and I was a dietitian. So at the time I was credentialed to talk about nutrition, and I was on my couch reading it. And I remember I stayed up the whole night reading it, because I was just drawn in and fascinated and really excited about the potential of this, even as a vegetarian. And I remember thinking wow, eating one ingredient foods and thinking through what I was eating in a day. And I'm I'm not eating very many one ingredient foods, especially when it came to a vegetarian diet. It was a lot of the, even though I thought it was healthy at the time, the processed, plant-based alternatives, and maybe oatmeal that had a ton of ingredients versus just a one ingredient oatmeal, and the non-fat or non-dairy yogurts and all the ingredients that were in there. And so it was eye-opening to me that I'm not eating as healthy as I think I am, even though the foods are fitting a framework that I think is healthier, which is a vegetarian. And there's a million ways to spin it, right? A vegetarian can eat a whole unprocessed diet for sure, but it was that awareness to me. And I think that it brings awareness to people when they start on a paleo diet or something like a paleo diet, like a Whole30 diet, where they take a step back from the routine of what they're doing and say, I had no idea all these foods had added sugar. I had no idea that this had corn in it. I had no idea that I actually wasn't eating a lot of vegetables. So there is validity to that. I think where people get hung up is that they almost enjoy, some people do, the black and white rules of this is how to eat healthy, because it feels like they can go on autopilot. And if they follow somebody else's rules and they don't get results, then, it's not on them. Or it just seems like it seems like the easiest way to go. And I saw this all the time when I was coaching people with Whole30. It's like they would want to keep on Whole30 because there was comfort in that rule and outline and structure of what they should and shouldn't eat. This isn't for everybody. There's definitely rebels and people that like the middle, but there was a certain group that liked it. And I think what is important with really any diet is to experiment with it and then move on to better understanding what feels right for you. Having a set period of time where you do reset and recalibrate and have your body get into a healthier state by flooding it with all these nutrients and whole and processed foods gives you that framework to then jump off from and say, okay, cool. I followed this. I know that I feel better without gluten. What happens when I reintroduce gluten? Do I still feel okay or not? And only you will know that. And working with a practitioner can help guide you. But what can happen is we feel really good for a set period of time. And then we either crash and burn because it was too restrictive and we just give up, or we try to continue with it long term, and that can turn into orthorexia or nutrient deficiencies or X, Y, or Z.
Totally.
Or, we might try to get a little bit overzealous and add too much back in at once, and then not really be able to pick apart, like, oh, was it the dairy that actually didn't make me feel good, or was it the gluten? And then you just kind of either have to go through that process again, or you forget how powerful food can be. And so with all of this, it's not necessarily that the approach is bad. It's just, or the framework is bad. It's just the implementation of it for the person.
So there's two essential things that I have to unpack that you just said. First was this idea that you intuitively knew once you read that book, you were like, oh, I'm not eating quote unquote healthy. Yeah. So you were like, I was eating literal Ezekiel sprouted bread with Morningstar veggie burgers. I was vegan in all of college, basically. So I was like, until like the last 6 months of college. And I think, again, when I read, I'm assuming it was Rob's book too, to be honest with you. When I read Chris Kresser's blog, maybe too at the time, Paleo Cure maybe. But when I read it for the first time, and for me, I said, oh my God, there's this whole world of healing in ways of my anxiety and ways of my gut health that I haven't even dipped my toe in, because I'm doing everything wrong compared to this. Literally the nutrition world was hard set on like low fat, kind of like low fat was a little bit moving out even when I was in school, but which is over 10 years ago when I started. But it was this idea, oh my God, every single thing I'm doing could be wrong, which leads to the kind of orthorexia piece of the puzzle, which if I were to say this, so orthorexia is a eating disorder where people are fearful, for people who don't know, where people are fearful of consuming foods that are not perceived as quote unquote like ultra healthy, essentially. I think paleo is like a kicker for the orthorexia crew. I mean, I think paleo is like one of the most, because you're talking about all right, this thought's so important, I don't want to mess it up. All right. We were talking about a diet for the first time that could reverse chronic illness. So this was appealing, yes, to the gym bros, yes, to the CrossFit ultra paleos. Now I'm using it, like we're going to use it in every type of verb, every single type of way. Liz will lay out for us what those are, the wordsmith.
I have no idea.
But it was the first time that we had this kind of answer in our heads to chronic illness. People who are freaking sick. We're talking about really sick people who are feeling their digestion is so off that they're running to the bathroom all day. For the first time in possibly their lives, they're having some relief from those symptoms. And paleo was the first diet of its kind that didn't just offer weight loss as a potential, right? It was saying, we're going to give you everything. We're going to give you everything. And in some ways, again, like I said, there's some merit to what they were saying. And in some ways, it created probably one of the worst versions of orthorexia for people, because you're appealing to people who are sick and are more likely to be afraid of foods, thinking this food's going to really harm me. So what came after paleo was a lot of these elimination diets in doctors' offices and dietitians' offices, because again, we realized, okay, this food can not only help someone lose weight, and it's not a tool for weight loss, it can be a tool for healing. And this was brand new. This was not a thing. This, besides, for 10,000 years in Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine. But in the Western world, this idea that we can heal food using heal using food as medicine was like, this was, very cutting edge. So I think for people with chronic illness, it put them in a particularly vulnerable position of having food fears in the long term, because they would actually experience sickness upon reintroduction of gluten or things like that. And we didn't know that it meant your gut needed more support. We just thought it meant gluten's freaking poison. And we didn't have the information we have now then, where I think that paleo for a lot of people, again, was like a little bit of an OG orthorexia situation. And certainly elimination diets, now we know, can definitely cause huge food fears for people, especially if you're doing them for too long and you don't reintroduce, your body is actually less likely to be able to tolerate it. So and we've talked about this in other episodes, and I would bring you guys back just to do a whole elimination diet episode. But I think that, for me, I'm realizing was what made paleo so threatening and at the same time so hopeful. It was that it was appealing to people who had never thought they could have hope in these arenas before. And the other thing I want to say is, in critiquing paleo against kind of this idea of it being a diet culture thing, I want us to kind of go into that too. Where's the intersection between paleo and diet culture? Where's the intersection between paleo and intuitive eating? Because I think of paleo, again, at its roots, being a totally different diet than it is now. And I don't think of it as being the same as what I would consider diet culture. Liz, can you tell me what you think about that?
Yes, but can I say something that I also want to say before I actually do what I'm supposed to do? Okay, excellent. I'm just sitting here writing notes.
Just go against the grain. Do whatever you want.
I'm going to be combative here. Actually, it's not combative. I'm actually agreeing wholeheartedly and tracing this sort of map in my head around the evolution, of paleo, where at the very beginning, we were like I said, quibbling over tomatoes and what type of gluten sensitivity you had. So it was like, are you celiac, or do you have a gluten allergy, or is it non-celiac gluten sensitivity, or is it like just gluten intolerance, or you just like think, so we were all like, yeah, none of us can eat gluten, but like if I'm not celiac, then I have this. It was all kind of, while we were trying to heal conditions, we were also ascribing conditions to ourselves, like what kind of intolerance you had to something. Totally. And then we were, like, is it FODMAPs? Is it SIBO? Like what, where do we need to take this and also be paleo? Which I thought was interesting. But at the same time, I think there were a subset of us that sort of evolved out of that to a point where we were willing to admit that this isn't it. This isn't going to be it for everybody, that we do need deeper levels of healing. And in that sort of seeking and that curiosity, there were some of us who took that fork in the road and started talking about sleep and stress and trauma and all of these other, circadian rhythm, all of these other things that are also, ancestrally rooted in how, the human being should actually be living in the world. And we took it that way, which I think ended up being a good thing. I think it sucks that people have to be collateral damage on some of these, but it's also a reality. And I think where we can plug in as people who care, you all as dietitians, me as a nutritional therapy practitioner, and people who are generating content, is to hopefully bring those people with us and say, like, you're not just collateral damage of this process that we've had to go through to learn that what we've had to learn. Like, we're here, we see the nuance, we can place this in context or help you place it in context for yourself, and like come with us. Like, I know you hate people who feel alone, you hate people feeling alone or lonely, Michelle, and that's like, I just see that as so much of your imperative is like, you're coming with us, like you're part of this. We can be curious, we can figure this out for you. What was the question I was actually supposed to answer?
About paleo and diet culture.
I mean, that's
paleo and diet culture.
And diet culture.
Yeah. Liz, I completely agree with you. You know what? And there's a piece of this when it comes to the paleo stuff with all of us. I mean, I consider you guys like total OG paleo crew. Like, you really were, for so many people, I think, such a beacon of hope and light at that time. And it was so exciting and it was so amazing. So I don't want us to be, I think all of us can take accountability at any stage in our career for us being too overzealous, too excited. That's just, it's what you're studying at the time. You're freaking excited. You want to help people. That's okay. And at the same time, that's where the nuance is. I do want to say, like, again, there was some excitement there, and that excitement still stands for all of us, 15 years later. So there was some juicy stuff there. And we can take that juicy stuff and apply it in the new tools we've learned, like you said, Liz, and carry that with us. If you look at any of our posts from 10 years ago, they're going to look different, but they're not going to look as different as I think other people who were still in that kind of nutrition paradigm. And all of us are very not ego-y and very not, like, I'm very down. Like, there's definitely horrible posts I've made. It's not even a question. There's definitely horrible posts I've made. But I feel like compared to my colleagues who, again, were in that full-on conventional nutrition mindset, I feel like we've stood the test of time for some things. Where things run into a problem, like in your example, Steph, is when you're following things and ignoring your own body signals, obviously, which is the whole premise of Quiet the Diet, right? Which is that you were like, I'm going to paleo so hard that if I'm losing my period or I'm getting sick, it's because I'm not paleoing hard enough. And that's all of our personalities. By the way, we're like, we're going to do it right. If we're going to try to do it, we're going to do it right. And the answer we thought was going harder always. We thought, and you know what? There was that accountability piece, which I always hated about my dietetics degree. Like, the thing I hated most was this is when something started to click with me. Junior year, we had a counseling class and we were learning how to do 24-hour recalls, which is just literally when you have the client go through what they ate in the last 24 hours, very popular in hospitals too, to understand overall consumption, right? So while we were doing the 24-hour recall, what we were learning in class was, how do you make sure that the person isn't lying to you? And I was like, is this a competition against the person? So it was like, well, most people don't recall what they're eating. So our goal was to make people very accountable. That was it. And it was putting the ownness on the person so much. It was like, no, they probably are snacking and not even realizing. That's why they're not losing weight. What I did love, again, about paleo in the beginning was that for the first time, I felt like it was putting it back on the system. And it was saying, like, guys, you're not sick because you're eating the extra snack in the afternoon. You're sick because everything you freaking learned was wrong this whole time. Yeah. And every food system's against you and pharmaceutical systems are against you. And that's what the hell is going on here. And I think when paleo kept going on, it kind of turned into what you're saying, Steph, which is to put the accountability back on the individual so much and being like, well, it's not our system that's broken. It's all the other ones. Our system's the only thing in town, the only thing that works. If you're not doing it right, you're not with us. And you're the problem. You're sick because of your own problems. And that was that lack of nuance that you're talking about, Liz, where we're talking about bringing the trauma piece in, bringing real evolutionary biology in to understand, like, the cortisol picture, right? To understand all of that. And that's where I think functional nutrition is starting to get it really right too. But that's for me when paleo switched into diet culture. Diet culture is all about putting the onus on the individual, but selling them a solution for that ownness and saying, and then this is the way you do it. If you do it right, you're going to get the benefits. Paleo wasn't really like that in the beginning. It was really like, we have a system. It's dope. The reason you're sick is because you don't know that the system exists in the first place. And it felt like we were together on it versus the accountability was not on the person. So I think in ways of the diet culture, we did wrap around to the question, Liz, which is that it became diet culture when we started to blame the individual over the systems, I think. And either of you want to jump in, please?
Yeah, I love that. Or even just what Liz is saying is like saying that diet is the only thing. And that it doesn't matter if you're not sleeping at all at night. It doesn't matter that you have these wounds from childhood that are impacting how you're eating or what you're eating. It doesn't matter that you are working 50-hour weeks and then pushing yourself at home. And it doesn't matter that you might have these food intolerances that are just undefined, or mold toxicity, or like all these other health issues that may be contributing. It just matters that you're following this diet. And if you do that, then you'll see results. And if you don't, then you're a failure. I feel like that's it. Also, the reason somebody goes into a paleo diet, that's the diet culture message. If they're going into it purely from an aesthetic perspective of, I want to do the paleo diet because I have a wedding in 2 months, and I'm using it solely for weight loss, that's where I see the mix too, versus actually, I think this might be a really healthy option for my body. And I'm looking for all of these different side effects that are maybe not body composition related, and body composition change could be like a nice side effect. Like, that's a different way to approach it. Or if you're going into it, like, totally. I don't know why I want to say balls to the wall, but like, you're going into it with like, I'm going to do paleo plus intermittent fasting plus start CrossFit plus like, not have blueberries after 4 p.m. Like, all of these different things. If you're going crazy with it and adding on more rules, then that's diet culture too, like making it harder than it needs to be. I think the other thing that is hard for me as a practitioner is I will have people that come to me and they have a laundry list of diets that they have tried, and often it includes paleo. And I think it's really important to be able to pull out the gems from each of these protocols that you have tried in the past, like not using your past diets as a sin or something you're shameful of, but being able to learn from them. And so I've worked with people in the past where they'll come to me after being on a bunch of different protocols, and they'll have worked with different practitioners, and they'll say, you know, my practitioner told me to do the 180-degree opposite of what I was doing. And that doesn't feel good at all. Like my body is not responding. And then they come to me and I ask them, well, what was the benefit of it? Did you notice that when you were on a paleo protocol, you were eating more vegetables? Did you notice when you were on maybe paleo, you were eating more seafood because you had limited protein options? Maybe you drank more water while you were on this versus soda. There are so many different things that could be beneficial parts of the protocol that you can implement into your own next step. And I feel like we can gaslight people by saying, no, that diet didn't work for you. You should never do paleo. Paleo isn't the answer. And instead take a step back and say, what pieces of all of these different protocols did work for you? And do you feel like you could maintain long-term and make sense within your context? Because I can think about any single diet that's out there and pull out something that could benefit somebody long-term. It's just how are they mixing and matching these protocols, and does it feel good to them? And like you said, only they know. And to have that ego as a practitioner to say, paleo is bad for everybody, vegetarian is the way, is not listening to the person and is completely missing the point and not advocating for them, which that's your role as a practitioner.
Yeah, this idea that not everything is diet culture and not every single component of all of these diets is bad, which is why, again, I'm here saying I think if you do a paleo diet and you paleo too hard, you're going to ignore your own body signals, and it's the same thing as doing any other diet. Period. Also, in functional nutrition, we have what's called mediators that we learn about our clients, which are things that make us feel better or worse, right? So we can learn, if someone does any diet, we can learn a huge amount of information. Everything's an opportunity. So like you said, instead of viewing it from this aspect of shame, we're viewing it as a huge opportunity to learn what worked and what didn't. I will also say that this applies to vegan diets, Weight Watchers. It could apply to any diets that also are more in the like realm of diet culture too. It's always more important with how it influences you. So when clients come to me and say, "Oh, I know I shouldn't want to lose weight," or "I know I shouldn't have done this diet, but I did," I'm like, you did it, don't care, let's learn from it. And that's it. It's like, let's move on from how we feel about what we've done and just talk about what we've done so we can actually learn.
And this is the practitioner side, you know, and not everybody can afford to work with a practitioner. That's the unfortunate truth. But I think at the point where you start to get so granular and so confused and you're starting to say, well, okay, I'm not going to eat kale anymore and I can't eat that, like all of these really continually like increasingly restrictive protocols that are out there, I think at a certain point, it is best to work with a practitioner to the degree that you can, because it can get so profoundly confusing and you can end up exhibiting all of the hallmarks of orthorexia without even knowing it, completely accidentally, without feeling like you are aiming for obsessive behavior. But just again, you're so afraid of food. You're so afraid of every bite that you're going to put into your mouth. And then at that point, it is the stress of it. Like that stress is having physiological consequences that are actually interacting with the food that is going through your digestive system. And it's just wild how all of these things can interact. I love everything that you said.
And I'm just piggybacking off of Steph, so we really love what Steph said.
Well, thank you.
I think
Really, this all started with
Steph. I think also what I want people to take away as a tangible from what you said, Steph, too, is when something isn't working for you, use it as two things: an opportunity to evaluate, and B, a trigger not to go harder doing it and assume that it's you that's the problem. Use it as a trigger to learn if the actual system you're using is a problem. I am a person who believes in obviously being responsible for our own lives, but I'm not a person who believes in this intense level of accountability that we put on people to figure out A, all of their health ails, given the systems that are at play, and B, to go again harder into something, this pain, no game kind of mindset really takes away from us listening to our body cues. So you guys, again, are OG vets in the paleo community, very well known. We're super hardcore in your personal lives, professional lives, really believed in it. And it was, a lot of the materials that people see floating on the internet was probably made by you and your colleagues. That's the things that we see today. So it's funny to me when I see people today with telling me or telling you guys, no, you got to do paleo. You're like, guys, I literally made that thing you're looking at. I don't tell me how to paleo. Okay. I know how to paleo. So tell me also at this point, what we're seeing in ways of how it's been watered down and who has the materials now and what you kind of see as the paleo diet community and world now compared to, again, how you feel about it. I want to talk about that. Steph, head us off with that.
Yeah, well, I actually don't know. And the reason that I don't know who is talking about paleo,
I don't either.
No, is because I feel like, I don't know, my world has expanded so far and wide outside of paleo and even diets in general that the people I follow are people that help me become a better person, help me become a better listener, help me become a better mom, help me think about things from a different perspective. I certainly don't just follow paleo people. I think that if you are just following people that speak to what you want to hear, you're never going to be able to fully understand what you're doing. You need to actually be following anti-paleo diet people too. So I don't really know. I don't know, Liz. You said you don't know anybody either.
Well, I think this is why we're here. I think that's why you and I are still here and are still doing this, because I think, at least to my perception, this might have just been the way I drifted, but a lot of that really dogmatic stuff over the course of the last 15 years, they're not even doing it anymore.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's not sustainable. It's not helpful.
That's it.
But we're still here. I used to joke about how I'm the only person in paleo that's not paleo, and of course I wasn't the only person, but it felt that way for a minute. But I really think we're still here, and we're still here for a reason. It's because we have been amenable to the context and to the nuance and to all of the complexities of this entire journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you guys answered it how I wanted you to.
You're welcome.
You fell right into my gotcha. This isn't like a fun podcast. This is an antagonistic podcast where I'm manipulating you both. So that is the reason that I'm asking you both this question. I know where you both stand. I know how you both are, but it's just so funny to me that there are people today, for you both to know, who are going so hard with, you need to follow it perfectly, and are just going so hard on paleo. And I'm like, dude, I'm sitting with the people who made the thing you're looking at, and they're telling you there's nuance around it. They're the ones who are telling you, don't follow this paper blindly. And if you are the people who are, again, not originating the diet, as we named some of the amazing originators of the program, but if the people who made a lot of the materials and a lot of the frameworks around what you're looking at and were foundational in this are telling you it's not that simple, I promise you it's not that simple. If it was that simple, y'all would still be, you're very smart, both of you. You would still be way in it. You would still be going hardcore. You both did it for your own bodies. It didn't work for your own bodies. There might be some people who it still works for their own bodies, but I have to tell you, even the most popular diets now that are really hot right now, and we'll call it in the keto arena, the originators are changing those diets all the time. The ones who there's some that just came out in the past 2 years or so, they're not even eating that way anymore. Because at the end of the day, what we know to be true is that there is truly, even the most hopeful one of all, paleo, the most hopeful style of eating that should and can be applied to everyone supposedly, still isn't perfect if you don't apply it individually. And I still, again, it's been 10 plus years that I've been interested in paleo and excited by paleo. And I still believe in some of the principles of it. Again, and this is Quiet the Diet. The whole point is to not use our egos, to listen to our intuition. And still the science does stand in some way. That being said, when you twist it with diet culture, it's the same thing as anything else. It's not, actually I want to rephrase that. It's really not the same thing as everything else, because I don't believe that any diet at baseline will produce good results. But I do believe that the very basic concepts of eating real whole foods will stand the test of time. And I think that'll be true in 50 years and 100 years. And I also think we'll learn more and more with nutrigenomics and with all these other amazing new sciences that are coming out, how darn individualized nutrition is. But
everything you were just saying reminded me of this quote that I'm going to butcher, but it's this quote is, being changeable at its best is wisdom. It's not inconsistency, it's wisdom. And we certainly have, a fork in the road there where some people are just kind of trying to throw anything they can at the wall and this isn't working, so let's throw this into the protocol. But there are also people, I think, like the three of us, I hope, who say, I observe this and wisdom would guide me to say, maybe now we need to look here and maybe now we need to add this layer onto this thing. And if we are approaching it that way, I think with wisdom as a guide, I think that's where we are going to end up with the best possible outcomes.
In addition to that, not only is it going to guide you in the right direction, it actually guides you in the same direction. All three of us came from completely different perspectives and kind of met in this, there's hope and excitement here. And now it's 10, 15 years later, and the three of us kind of live our lives really similarly as practitioners, as people, as eaters. And the truth that evolves, I think, does evolve. But what is so beautiful and so amazing is that underneath kind of all of these diets and underneath all of these things is innate wisdom and truth. There is real truth. And all three of us practice under that truth, which is that people matter, our soul and the way we feel about things matters, and that we are all so unique. And I think that we all landed in the same diet kind of mentality or ideas about diet culture or ideas about intuitive eating, because not only when you pursue truth without ego, you all land on the same truth, which is so amazing. And I feel that way, why the three of us, I think, feel so connected and why we've always just jived so well is because underneath ego is just, there's inherent truth, I think, which is so cool.
Yeah. I love that. Oh, so beautifully said.
Wow.
I love how you speak. It's just very true and raw and real. And I would say like how my protocol or like how my eating style has changed now is I follow something more of a I call it structured flexibility. So I use a concept that I've learned through paleo and through trying different things over the years to inform what makes sense for me in the broad concept for each day. So I know a certain amount of protein makes me feel good. Then I can plug and play what that looks like based on what's available, what sounds good. I know having vegetables, a large amount at lunch and dinner, feels good. Whatever those vegetables are, like I can play with. Fats, like I know I need to have a good amount of fat at each meal to feel full. So from there, I have so much flexibility where it keeps things fun and interesting. I know I'm going to feel well because I've got enough of that protein and fiber and phytonutrients to really thrive, but I'm not so rigid in what I can and can't have, especially as a mom where I'm going out to dinner with my family. And I don't want to not have the ice cream because it's not paleo. I don't want them to see that I'm counting or weighing a certain amount of food because I don't want them to feel like food is a number. I want them to understand how it's broken down and actually teaching my kids about the structure of what actually will make their body feel good, but not bound to the rules. So like, for example, dairy with my kids, like sometimes we have it, sometimes we don't. Gluten, if they're out at a birthday party, sometimes they have it, but most of the time they don't. And I think it's really important, especially like Liz and I are both parents, is to work on yourself before you have kids ideally. But when you do have kids, make sure that some of your like food issues aren't subconsciously pushed on them. And I think the best way to start is to eat well, but not be so structured or rigid with it that there's fear attached to it. I don't think it's wrong to kind of have a framework that works for you. But the problem is when it's become too rigid, where if you steer off track or if you start becoming more isolated or not going to a party or events because of it.
Steph, I just made like a marketing thing for you and your business. By the way, you don't need it. You're fine. But I just made this and I need to share it with you. So in the Functional Nutrition Matrix, we talk about Andrea Nakayama. We talk about mediators as being things that obsessed. I mean, she's one of my closest friends. I can't even talk about Andrea. And she listens to every episode. She'll die when she hears this. But we think about mediators being the things that make us feel well or don't. The Steph Greunke promise is that the plans that you make will be based off of your mediators. So the advice you're giving people is start off with, first of all, you have to listen to and know your body. You have to track, you have to see what works for you. And sometimes that can be, you start with something like a paleo diet. I'm not saying do that, but you take what you learned from that and you basically make your meal plan or your meal template off of your mediators. So if you know for a fact, hey, I don't feel good when I eat gluten, base your plan off that. Now you have to know where you're getting your carbs from. If you know that you eat a lot of protein, you need to base your plan off your mediators. And to know where your mediators are, you actually have to do some experimentation. And that could be starting with something more structured and then taking from it what you can and building based on that. So the Steph Greunke thing is she'll help you.
Thanks for doing my
build your meal plan based off of your own mediators.
Yep, that's exactly what I do. But
exactly.
It's honestly what I do with clients. Like if somebody comes to me and they're eating a certain way and they're close to that structure, I'm not completely changing the structure. I'm going within the bounds of what they're eating, but how can we maybe add a little bit more protein or maybe add a little bit more fiber or maybe we take out a little bit of sugar because people in human behavior doesn't often do well with dramatic change, especially if they got a lot on their plate already. And so I know we're talking about like all these inputs too, but sometimes it's like when I'm working with somebody, we don't even start with food. We look at what is their hang up, what is their mediator, even outside of food. And it might be sleep, like until we get them sleeping more regularly.
Yep. Mediators are not only food. Totally. Yeah. I would call those also like your functional foundations, which I always have this image, and I'm sure I'll talk about this in many other episodes of our body is like a house. And what a lot of functional dietitians or conventional dietitians do is if the foundation of your house is crumbling, but then you just throw some supplements in there, you throw some diet changes, it's almost like hanging pictures out upstairs, you're not handling those foundations. So that's a different kind of component of the functional nutrition matrix too. But absolutely what you're saying is you need to get your foundation squared up before you even find out what your mediators are and things like that also. So that's really, really important. Liz, what do you got?
I know we're like getting short on time, but I wanted to make a quick comment that sort of reflects on what you were talking earlier about where we're at with like diet culture and paleo. I think what a lot of people began to feel was very diet culture-y was this encouragement to track things, tracking. And what I had to, the argument I had to have with myself was like tracking and sort of always pulling out these little things like how you feel and what you ate and how many carbs and how many calories and tracking your macros and all of that. I sort of put that all into the same bucket. And the bucket was the obsessing bucket. Like we're obsessing. But what I see now, and I'm always learning, like this never ends for me. I'm always learning. But what I see now, even based on this conversation that we're having, is something that should have been so obvious to me, but I don't think it was, is the difference between obsessing and observing. And what you all are talking about, and what I've learned so much from you guys, is that this idea of looking at how we feel and taking back that agency and that onus, how you feel is very different. Tracking how you feel is observing. Tracking your macros and even some of this new wave of tracking every single nutrient that you take in, that can very quickly become obsessive behavior and orthorexia. But that distinction between obsessing and observing is just so huge to me right now. And I think that's where we can sort of guide that away from diet culture and toward personal agency. And that was all inspired by what you were just saying.
I love that. And it's where the input is coming from. Is it coming from outside or within? Yeah. And that's what's so essential. And we're just going to do a whole Andrea obsession thing, but in, Andrea's work, she often talks about keeping a food, mood, poop journal. So even if you are tracking the food aspect of it, you're immediately tying in what the inside is based on what you're seeing from a sign or symptom perspective on the outside. So that's a really good way of putting it. And I think takeaway wise for people, get to know yourself. If you're engaging also in something like a paleo diet, notice how you're feeling along the way. Know yourself when it comes to food changes. Tap in instead of looking outwards. You can absolutely experiment with things, but you must listen to yourself along the way while you're doing that. And also there's some things about the paleo diet that are still cool. That's all I'm saying. I think that's the nuance of it, is that it's not this thing where you throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, don't throw babies out in general. Like, don't.
That's so rude.
And yeah, it's like literally rude.
Yeah, don't do that.
So funny.
So
Wow, this could become political. I didn't mean it like that. But I think for people, again, tapping in versus tapping out, understanding that when you're trying something, you're trying it for yourself, not to be a part of the larger community. And if you're going really hard at something and it's not working, let that be a trigger to look inwards, not a trigger to go harder. I'm obsessed with both of you. We're obviously going to be doing these episodes every freaking season. Steph, can you tell us where these amazing people can find you? Steph Greunke. Look at the spelling, because it's an unexpected spelling when you're going to her website. I'm of course linking your website in the show notes, but how can people work with you, find you, be obsessed with you like I am?
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you so much for having me. This has been fun. So my last name is Greunke, StephGreunke.com. I'm playing with what I want to do with my business right now. I am working full time, but I do have so much in my head that I want to share clearly. And social media, it hasn't been my favorite place to be. So I'm thinking about playing with a blog. So keep track on that. I do pop it up every now and then on social media. I'm usually in stories because that's more fun. And I have a podcast, Dr. Mom Podcast. It is about preconception, pregnancy, postpartum, and motherhood in general, that I host with a pediatric naturopathic doctor named Dr. Ilana Romel. We interview guests you both were on this upcoming season, and about all things like health and wellness. And I have a program called Postpartum Reset, which is a guide for moms that have had their baby that want to learn how to eat well and nourish themselves in a really realistic way. This isn't a paleo diet or it's really that structured flexibility that we were talking about, along with labs to get done and supplement recommendations. So it's like a functional medicine course in your pocket for moms, which really there isn't much out there like it.
That's amazing. And we will link everything, because I know people will be running over to your page and certainly to your podcast and certainly to your resources. So thank you, Steph. And we want you to blog. We need you to talk. We need to hear from you. So yes, I like those project ideas for you. Liz Wolfe, what do you got for us?
You can
find the magical Liz?
You can find me just standing Michelle and Steph. I think the kids are saying standing these days. Is that the proper term? Just kidding.
I don't think you should say it. I'm kidding. You can say whatever you want.
It didn't feel right coming off my tongue there. You can find me. I have a podcast. We're 400 episodes and counting, the Balanced Bites podcast. And it's really about everything that we've talked about today, bringing balance on all levels, food, fitness, life, doing right by yourself, not doing right by a diet or a plan. So you can find me at the Balanced Bites podcast. I aim to give new episodes weekly. And you can also find me at realfoodliz.com. You can sign up for my email list there, and at realfoodliz on Instagram.
Everyone listening will become as extremely ferociously obsessed with these two as I am. And it is a guarantee I will be having you both back, because we did really good. An hour 21. That's like not that bad.
Phenomenal.
I don't know what it's going to change in editing, but I thought we were going to do like 6-7 hours. Like I fueled up my glycogen storage before this.
We could have.
I was like, this is a marathon. Exactly. All right, you guys.
We were all very on task. Well done, friends.
Yeah, that was good. Okay, thank you guys so much. And I can't wait for this episode to come out. Thank you.